Welcome, everybody, to Leading a Trauma-Skilled School. It's great to have everybody here today. We're slowly bringing people in. I'm just going to wait for Thomas to give me a thumbs up that we're all ready to go.
Should be all set now.
Sounds great. Thanks, Thomas. Well, on behalf of the National Dropout Prevention Center and the Successful Practices Network, I want to thank you all for coming and visiting with us today in this event called Leading a Trauma-Skilled School. I'm Ray McNulty. I'm the president of the National Dropout Prevention Center and the Successful Practices Network. Been a long-time superintendent, commissioner, and I'm excited to be joined today by our director of a lot of our work, a researcher who has put together the Trauma-Skilled School Initiative, John Gailer. John, you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. It's good to see all of you. Glad that we can join you here on this summer morning, and appreciate you giving us the time and the opportunity to really talk. I also, it's been my privilege to be with the National Dropout Prevention Center for a little over 10 years now, and I think I've got one of the best jobs in the world because I get to travel and meet some of the greatest folks alive, and those are our educators. I also want to just introduce and mention a couple people that are on our call with us as well. They're team members with the National Dropout Prevention Center, and I'll just ask them to wave. We're a little bit. We've got Dr. Tommy Stevens, who is our project director. And Tommy oversees pretty much all of our implementations of the Trauma-Skilled Schools model, all of our agreements that we do with schools and school districts across the country. Tommy kind of monitors those, makes sure they're moving along and going well. We also have, the National Dropout Prevention Center has some certification programs that are available for both schools and for individuals. And the coordinator of those programs, our certification coordinator, is Miss Nancy Nielsen. Nancy, if you can wave. Glad to have them on. And so if we have questions and things as we move along, feel free to put those in the chat. If you have questions for those two especially, I think they'll be monitoring those questions as well. So Ray, why don't we go ahead and get started?
That sounds great. Yeah, and it is great to have you all here. And one of the things while we do this presentation, our goal is to spend about 45 minutes presenting, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you have a question as we're speaking, you want to drop it in the chat box, that's fine. As long as our numbers stay under 50, we'll just at the end of time, we'll open it up as well for you can ask just general questions from the crowd. This session today is you're gonna learn very little bit about the Trauma-Skilled School work. You'll get to look at the program and all of that, but this is really about leadership and how how much the impact of leadership matters in this important work. And so what I want to do is start off by saying, look, sometimes really well-designed research-based programs, they end up having little or no impact. And look, I've been in the profession a long time, teacher, principal, superintendent, commissioner, and always get a program, say, oh, this program works, let's input it. And then we input it and we find out nothing happened. And then the question is, why? Like, why didn't it work? Research, we do John has been doing implementations with Tommy and the team at National Dropout all around the country. We're doing regular Trauma-Skilled School training events. We've got to be in, over 35 or 40 states doing this work. And, we do the work and we say some sites, it's amazing. And some sites, it doesn't impact it the way it should. And when we look at that, here's what, we look deeply at the research, and the issue is really the school leader. The quality of leadership matters. It matters a lot in terms of motivation of the teachers, the staff, the quality of their work. And what I want to say is effective school leaders work to build the capacity of others and create a culture where collective efficacy can be the root. Now, there's a really great quote by Professor Frances Fry at the Harvard School of Business. And she says this about leadership. And I love this quote. Leadership is about making other people better as a result of your presence and having that last in your absence. Just going to say it one more time. Leadership is about making other people better as a result of your presence and having that last in your absence. It's really important, the role of leadership in all of this work that goes on. And when we talk about that, we talk about efficacy. So that's the ability of a product to produce the desired results or effects. So, we know the work of trauma skilled schools. We know it makes a difference in schools, but yet we sometimes see an implementation and it doesn't get the results. And looking at that, when school leaders, when they work with the school staff in a manner that says we're all in this together, you create that sense of efficacy, and you believe that you can make a difference, everyone succeeds. That's what we find in our systems. Everyone succeeds. So, when you look at this work and you look at everything that we know, and the work of John Hattie, that Hattie talks significantly about collective efficacy. But this piece of research, which I think is pretty profound, basically says, look, when we get this work of efficacy, the collective the work of teachers and staff, we can make a difference in the lives of students over and above the impact of their homes and communities. So this is over and above. So when we talk about overcoming socioeconomic challenges, we can do that when we build the right program, when we build the clear impact of collective teacher efficacy, collective staff efficacy. Many of you I know have seen the work of Hattie, but when Hattie looks at this, over 26 studies confirm the strong correlation with student achievement when you have collective efficacy at the point of a 1.57. Now, 0.4, as we know in the research, 0.4 says you get a year's worth of results for a year's worth of effort. When you involve collective teacher efficacy, it's almost, look at that, almost 1.6. It's 1.57. And again, in the research, right, student achievement, collective efficacy explains student achievement more than socioeconomic status. So we really have to begin to think about implementation, and we've designed a process for implementation that I'm going to share with you. I'm going to first share a strategy of implementation. Then John's going to talk about the program and the effects of the program and some of the details of the program. And then John and I will come on and we'll talk through the 5 steps that we've designed at the National Dropout Prevention Center for implementation strategy. And that strategy is very powerful and can be used in many ways. But before I do that, let me just share an implementation strategy that we use often as we work with schools. And I know some of you that are on participants today have seen me use this before, but this is an implementation process. And so when you get ready to implement something, oftentimes in schools, we implement with everybody en masse. And the fact of the matter is that if you know Dweck's work about mindsets, there's a group of people in your buildings, and all buildings have these people. And the people that are right here on this chart. These people are people that love ideas. You come to them with an idea, they say, I can do it. And so these people have a mindset. Their point is, they have a mindset. They like ideas, they will go. These are the people that you begin work with. And the reason you do that is that you see these people here, these people, they're cautious of ideas. And what they need to see before your idea makes any sense to them, they need to see how the process works in the building. So what happens is you start with these people who like ideas, they begin and they develop a process. When these people see the process, they say, oh, now I see how things work. Now these people over here, these people, they will not change. They will not invest heavily in a new program unless they see results. They are the believers that it's, when you show me it gets results, I will do it. So when you think about this is how the people in your buildings think. They're not resistant often. Now, there is another group that will, over here that we're not going to talk about right now, but they probably, they're going to need, like when you transform almost 90% of your staff, then they'll have to move. But this is a strategy, an implementation strategy that's, I think, quite useful as you think about implementing any idea. And I go along with, the idea of this work with trauma-skilled schools. So John, I'm going to stop my share and say hi to all the people that are out there, because I can see them all on my screen now, and let you pick up the share.
Okay, that'll be great, and I'll do that in just a second. And it's I get to explain a little bit about the model of trauma-skilled schools, but I'd like to get some of your feedback a little bit. Just if you could go to the chat and just tell me how, on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 being I've never heard of it, I just am curious and 5 is I know this trauma-skilled schools model very well. On a scale of just 1 to 5, or 0 to 5, I'm sorry, go ahead and just type that number in the chat so I get an idea of how many people or what is the familiarity. Okay, so we've got somebody, I see a 3, 2. I've got somebody with a moving up. We've got some folks that are fairly familiar with the model, so that's good. And I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about it. I appreciate that. We've got 4 people there with Kathy, so glad to have all 4 of you. We only see, only aware of 1, but we're glad to have all 4 of you there. And again, if you have questions as we go through, please feel free to add those in the chat. And what I'm going to do is just spend, I think, maybe 5-10 minutes and talk about the model and give you an overview of it. As I share my screen, do want to let you know, for the National Dropout Prevention Center, we have, since 1986, we've been working with schools, school systems, and state departments of education across the country in areas of dropout prevention. And we have been working in areas, and you see them on the screen. We look at graduation rates, we look at behavior, truancy, student disengagement, academic failure, and we have been dealing and helping schools move the needle in those areas since 1986. And we see some things that really have worked, but really in the last 5 years, we've seen, okay, we've moved the needle in some of those areas, but as far as really closing that gap and moving it more and really making it go to the next level, we feel like, we may be barking up the wrong tree. And all of the things that we're looking at there, we're looking at symptoms of something that really is a deeper problem. That deeper problem is probably the root source of some of what we're dealing with and some of the causes of that, and that is childhood stress and trauma. So over the past, I would say 5, 6, 7 years, we've begun to look at that issue. And as we did that, we did a national conference that we ran that conference for 3 years, and that was more of a trauma-skilled, trauma-informed kind of approach. And educators came back to us and said, we need something more. And they began to talk to us about the different things that were happening in regard to stress and trauma in their schools. We had educators from across the country that came and presented at our conferences. And what we really began to learn is that when we think of this issue of stress and trauma, there really is a traditional response that we've taken in education. That traditional response really stems from back in the 90s, where we talk about the ACEs study. And in that ACEs study, we are talking about something that happened. And we began to develop the idea that there's something that happened that is driving some of the behaviors and some of the outcomes that we're seeing. And that really drove us to look toward identification of students. And that was the traditional response. We want to identify what students are dealing with what. And then what we'll do is we'll train the teachers to deal with this, and we'll hire some specialists. Typically, we're looking at social workers, counselors, and they can deal with these students that we identify. We would then develop interventions, and we would place those identified students in the interventions. What we were hearing from educators coming out of the conferences that we ran and everything else was that the results that they were seeing was there was inconsistent implementation. Some teachers changed their practice. Some teachers made some adjustments. Others did not. We found that those specialists that we hired, their caseloads became overwhelming. And so the answer appeared to be, well, we just need to keep hiring more and more specialists. We need to give them more time in the day. And we also heard that there's incomplete identification of students. And we know if we look at the impact of stress and trauma, we can never really 100% identify students who are experiencing the effects of those issues in our classrooms and in our schools. So we set out and we spent a good deal of time developing, utilizing everything that we knew from moving the needle in those areas that we talked about, spending what work moves the needle in issues in education. And what teachers were telling us is we need something that our whole school adopts. And our whole school can move as a corporate unit, as a body, we move through this process. And so we developed the trauma skilled schools model. And if we look at the approach to that, and again, looking at the approach to that and the outcomes that we were seeing previously from the issue of stress and trauma, I placed those up there in the right-hand corner because that's what we're trying to address. And what we developed is a framework that really is the way a school moves through this process, but it's a whole school approach to training and to implementation. If you remember the traditional response, we train the teachers. In the trauma skilled schools model, we're very careful and we're insistent. We train the teachers, we train the administration, we train volunteers sometimes, we train bus drivers, we train food service workers. It's a totally systemic approach to this issue and everybody is a part of the team. Go ahead, Ray.
No, I was going to say, John, for all of you, it's, this is equivalent to if you have reading problems and you start hiring a lot of reading specialists, and then you decide, well, the best approach first is to have all of our educators be reading instructors, right? You train them about it. And what happens is it reduces that load that's on the other side. So it's like this is a tier 1 RTI kind of a strategy. The strategy is everybody needs to be able to deal up front with skills to be able to help students that are experiencing trauma in their lives. And we have to look at the rules and regulations in our schools that don't become drivers or triggers in our system so that we can reduce the load for those students downstream that need specific help. I think it's a really practical approach that that John and the team put together.
Right. So, we train everybody. Thank you, Ray. And it's exciting to watch when we're doing our training, to watch bus drivers and custodians who are usually left out, and they get this information. They are the ones that see the students. And a lot of times they are the ones that can identify with where they're coming from. So there's a whole school approach to training and implementation. And as Ray mentioned, it is a tier 1 intervention. We avoid the whole idea of identifying students as being the primary point of intervention. In other words, we're doing a tier 1 intervention where we are recognizing that, the research shows that, and this was prior to the pandemic, that well over half of our students are impacted by the issues of stress and trauma. And most of those will never be identified if we're relying on our identification methods. So we actually are dealing with all students and changing the way we do school to treat all students as if they are experiencing the effects of stress and trauma. And what we find is that not only do we help those that are experiencing the effects of stress and trauma, but we help all students. Thirdly, we really point toward intentional corporate or cultural shifts, trying to change and adjust school culture to build resilience in both staff and in students. And here we talk about school culture, and we take a different approach in that a lot of schools have a very good culture, a very positive culture, a very accepting culture. But those cultures, even though they are good and they are strong, they do not necessarily focus on or build resilience. So we try to seek to identify some initiatives and adjustments to school culture that will build resilience for the students. And all of those efforts help, of course, with the staff as well. And then we also provide intentional training for skills over time. And when we train for skills, that's very different than training for knowledge. When we impart skills, and when we impart knowledge, we basically are running through information and sharing information. When we are training for skills, you provide information and there's a time of learning, but then there's also a time of application. And then you apply that information, you implement it, and then you go back and you review and you make adjustments, and then you implement it again, and you keep going and you practicing to get a skill. Somewhere along the line, I started doing some juggling. I was a pitcher in high school, and when I wasn't pitching, I'd be in the dugout just trying to juggle baseballs. And that gave me the ability to do a little bit of juggling, but I'm not a juggler. I don't practice it. I don't put in the work to be skilled in that area. So when we talk about intentional training for skills, that includes time of practice and rehearsal of those skills. And I think that is one area that really sets us apart, the Trauma Skilled Schools model. This is the Trauma Skilled Schools model in a nutshell. It's the graphic that really shows what the model is all about. It is designated into 5 steps, and I want to just take just a couple minutes and walk you through how do we implement it and what in the world does this graphic mean. And it'll get a little bit messy as we move through it, but just follow along and we'll see. We really start, if a school is going to implement the Trauma Skilled Schools model, we're going to start with step 4, which is an assessment and implementation. And what we're doing is we spend during that entire process, we start with a readiness assessment that gives us an idea of where that staff is in regard to the issues of stress and trauma. We also do some student surveys that give us some information of where that school is as far as student body and where they may want to go. And we'll look at a little bit of that student data in just a second. So we start with those assessments. We then move in the first 3 months of implementation, we want to train. We do that training on knowledge, and we want that to be everybody. We want them to have an understanding of what the effects of stress and trauma are on learning, but also on behavior, because those are the issues. Learning and behavior, that is our wheelhouse as educators. So we want to give them that understanding of the impact of stress and trauma on learning and on behavior. And we do that over the course of the first 3 months. And then we follow that by teaching about building resilience and how culture can build resilience. And we focus that around 5 resilience factors. You see those there on that screen on the diagram. There's connection, which is a one-on-one relationship with an adult, a healthy relationship that meets the needs of the students, not necessarily the needs of the adult. So that connection is a one-on-one relationship. And we talk about what that means. We talk about boundaries. We also want to build a one-to-many, or a sense of belonging, is the second resilience factor. The sense of achievement. And this is the difficult part. We as educators think of achievement and we automatically go to the thoughts of academic achievement, student achievement. And we're not talking achievement, we're talking about recognizing student strengths. Students who are experiencing the effects of stress and trauma feel defective. They feel like they can't accomplish anything. They feel like they are worthless. They feel like they are unworthy of any kind of positive attention. That drives some of their actions, and it really can also give insight into some of the learning difficulties. Well, what we're trying to convince them is that they are good at something. And sometimes that thing that they are good at may be outside the classroom. It may be something that may be the best caregiver for their grandparents or for their little brother or sister. So we find what they're good at. We get creative at finding that, and then we emphasize that to defeat that false belief that they really don't have anything that they can do. The fourth resilience factor, real quickly, is autonomy, giving them options to where they learn that their choices really do matter. A lot of those young people feel trapped. They feel like they're just a victim of fate. Bad things just happen to them. And by giving them guided choice, we are trying to give them a sense that their decisions matter. Also in autonomy, we want to teach social and emotional skills that really help them to manage their behavior and to manage their emotions. In fulfillment, we're trying to give them a service orientation or an orientation toward others, and the fact that they do have something that they can contribute, which again combats some of the false beliefs that they have. So we spend the first 6 months with that kind of training. We're also immediately following that training on the building resilience and the resilience factors. We do an individual skills assessment, and this is with staff. And it really relates to those 5 resilience factors and tells us, okay, what is it that the staff feels like or has a need for training or for professional development? Where do we need to focus our attention on those resilience factors? And then after that, we take all of the information that we have from the readiness, all of the information that we have gleaned from the trainings and from the data points that we've collected, and we develop a plan for that school. We don't develop that plan. There is a lead team that really is helping to lead through this entire process. That lead team is really selected back in the very beginning of the implementation. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, how we select that lead team and different things. But we put together a plan that school will follow. And then for the next year to year and a half, we are actually begin the training of individual skills. And so then we follow that up. At the end, we complete it. In the end, I say that's typically a 2-year cycle to do initial implementation with this model. We follow it up with a repeat of the readiness assessment and the student surveys. The result of that process as we go through this model, just some highlights really that come out is when we look at this, every implementation involves all staff, and that is led by a representative lead team that is there. And they work with leadership to decide what initiatives are put in place, what happens, what do we focus on, what professional development do we offer. So implementation looks different in every context. We have put this in place in urban schools, in rural schools, and it looks very different based on the school and based on their context, based on their needs. The second thing, every implementation, as we say, is unique, and it's guided by a local plan, driven by data points that we collect throughout this process. I mentioned that, and you saw some of the student surveys that I mentioned. And if we look at that, here is the results of the student surveys. Now, this is a pre and post, so it combines this. And what we're looking at is the student surveys will give us information or really kind of a ranking or a scale based on the 5 resilience factors. So you see in this graph, you're seeing how they scored in relationship to connection, to belonging, achievement, autonomy, and fulfillment. And there are also some other questions that we have in that dashboard or in those surveys that just give us some other general questions about the culture and what resilience factors we need to focus on. We can also take that data and we break it down and we look at it by grade level. And here I've just taken the data that you saw and broken it down. You can look by grade level and see where that is. That's the kind of data that will drive the plan. And these are some of the questions that are on those surveys and the response to them. So for instance, in this category, if you were say you're in a high school setting, you're running a 9th grade academy, you may have a very good 9th grade or freshman academy for, freshman success academy or whatever you have, really focusing on that 9th grade transition. But if you look at the first question on this survey, you can say, okay, 9th graders, only 43% of our teachers really care about them. So that'll tell you some of the things that you've missed. That's just an indicator in this particular data set. So the data is what drives every implementation. We also have every implementation really includes and leads to the development of a sustainability plan. That lead team puts together a plan on how are we going to train new staff? How are we going to keep these things going? And how are we going to move forward? So if we look at the Trauma Skilled Schools model, it's a 2-year initial implementation, looks different everywhere. It's guided by leadership and a lead team. And it really tends to move the needle in how we're doing school to help students who are experiencing stress and trauma. So with that, that's an overview, a very quick overview of the model, and I'll turn it back over to Ray to continue our discussion.
Thanks, John. And as you all listen to that, and John going through the process, as I go to grab my screen again, let's see. Are you? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Uh-oh.
And I'll tell you, while Ray's finding his screen,
yeah, thanks, John.
One of the things that we have experienced, we have some implementations that have gone very well. We have some implementations that have not gone so well. And typically what we find is the difference, one of the main differences that we find, and I think Nancy's been involved in some of these, Tommy's been involved in all of these, is the role of the leader. And that is one of the reasons that we put this piece together, because the leader really can make the difference in whether this is going to work or really fit in the school and be effective or not. So we're glad that you're here and getting this information. And I think
I'm giving them a quick review of the whole program right now. There you go.
I think the information gives you some, this information will give you things regarding of the implementation.
Yeah.
So, okay, go ahead, Ray.
I really appreciate, and thanks, John, for covering for me. That's great. But what I want to do now, and what John and I want to do, is we want to talk you through and I'm gonna use the expression, the back of the house. Like, what do you need? If you're going to build a new home, you've got to clear the land. You got to build a strong foundation as you start to build. And the research is telling us, look, all the initiatives, when you launch a program, there's a series of things you must do. And this work comes out of the long-standing work of the National Dropout Prevention Center. But this is an implementation strategy, and as you can see on the screen, I label it trauma skilled implementation strategy. If you're launching, I'm going to tell you this point blank. If you're launching a new math program, you can put math program implementation strategy. But what you want to do, this is a strategy that I hope all of you that are with us today understand can be applied to most initiatives. If you're in that position of launching new initiative, this is some of the best work I've seen out there. And what you see in this slide is there's 5 steps, but we actually merge the first 2 steps into one. And what you're going to see here is these 2 steps. This is the beginning work. Before you get out into the field and you start launching this work, look, leadership matters. We all know that. The questions that you have to ask yourselves as a team is, who makes up the team and that's going to be representing the school? So if you're going to launch something, look, the superintendent, the curriculum director, it's going to have to be a site-based team that you're going to have to put together. So who makes up the team? What are the ground rules for discussion and disagreement and decision-making on that team as they start to launch this work? How are ideas and decisions and plans going to be communicated to others? So you've got this internal team that's launching this work. How are they communicating with others? And how will collective efficacy be built into the process? How will we get everybody on board? So it leans into this other side of, so what is the focus of this work? Have you, how did you come to this idea of trauma skill? Did you reach out to the faculty and say, are these issues that we need to come up to, we come up with a plan for? Get them involved in understanding what it is that's going to happen to them. And how will you communicate this to others, to the school board, to the teams, to the parents? And what will this look like when you put it into practice? Think ahead of time. And then ask yourselves this question, you focus on this work, how, will be successful when what happens? get an understanding ahead of time before you launch. You want to add anything to that, John?
No, I think
Okay.
good
So,
point.
so the first two look at leadership and focus and answer these questions, and you start to begin to develop the groundwork for this important work. Next, we look at which would be the third step if we didn't combine the first and second. Is it a systemic approach? So what does this look like? Is it a district-wide initiative or a school-based initiative? It takes, if you're here as a superintendent, you're thinking, I've got to launch a district-wide initiative, you've got to have a lot of leadership teams around the system that are going to do it. If it's a school-based, principal's got to be a critical person, and we've got to build that team. How will the leaders be prepared to lead the implementation? John showed you the implementation strategy, I should say, of the elements of the program. The leaders need to understand their role in each of those. How will the teachers be prepared to implement this in the classroom? Are you going to be able to have it so that there is some practice going on? John talked about the differences between training for learning and training for skills. Skills, they need to be doing implementation. How is that work being planned? How will the support staff be involved in the implementation? John talked about bus drivers and custodians and all the paraprofessionals. When those bus drivers swing those doors open in the morning and the student comes up on the stairs and the student gets a greeting that's, hey, it's great having you on the bus today. Good to see you. You make my day every day. That's a welcoming that a student looks forward to every day. So how do they get involved? It's going to make their lives better on the bus as they learn about how to deal with this work. And then also, if it's a school-wide approach, if it's a system-wide approach, what's your timeline? John showed you the timelines that we work on for this work. We don't think you should rush this work. The work needs to be put out there, and educators need to practice with it. There needs to be some discussion about it. There needs to be regular support. You have to make this plan in advance. This is kind of, if you think about getting ready for a holiday, all the things you think about and all the details you get, you've got to build a system that approaches every initiative that you're going to put time and effort in. You've got to launch it with a thoughtful approach. We get to the next, which is kind of the concept of monitoring your progress. You have to think about this ahead of time, not after. How do you know what you are doing is working? Are you going to have some regular meetings? Are you going to look at particular data points? What is it that you're going to be looking for? Talk about that in advance. This is an important thing. If you were working with a team from NDPC, that would be a part of a conversation we would have. What are you looking to accomplish? How will we know it's working? And what targets are you setting that will determine the effectiveness of your implementation? It's not just about the program, it's about the effectiveness of your implementation. You all know that when you're launching an initiative you're implementing an initiative, there are those people that, as I said earlier, that will begin to do it right away. There'll be other people that will say, if we wait long enough, this will go away. What is your plan to make sure that you're going to capture all of them so that so one group doesn't say, oh, we're just going to wait till it's over, and then they'll forget. You've got to be in it for the long haul. And the question is, who will do the monitoring, and how will monitoring of the implementation work? I've worked with many school districts that talk about, they teach a reading strategy, and then they expect, well, then I guess educators are going to implement it. No, the way you do it is you say, we're going to be coming around the building and watching for the implementation. Tell us when you're doing an implementation. We'll come and help and support you. Not in an evaluative way, in a way of coaching, so that they can practice some of their things, and then you could give them some feedback. But who will do the monitoring is really important, and how will they do it? How will they be prepared? I think it's good to have those people practice some of these things. Give them a chance to think through this. And what if it's not working as you planned? What's your plan for that? Because here's the thing. Sometimes when things aren't working, we immediately stop. And the fact is, what we have to do is assess it and say, what adjustments need to be made. We are living in a period of time of constant disruption. And so, we need to be adaptable. If the plan's not working, how do we adapt it? What are the things we can do? Bring our teams together. If you have answers to these things, as things start to surface with the implementation, someone will say, it's not working. Well, what's our plan for that? What did we talk about ahead of time? Absolutely a critical piece of this work. And the last step in this process, ensuring success for all. So the idea is that we have to look at the implementation, and is it working for all of our students, all of our population? When we do, and John's team, when they get engaged with trauma-skilled schoolwork, oftentimes it involves making sure staff are taking care of themselves, making sure teachers are taking care of themselves. Is it working for everybody? It's an absolutely critical thing. And if there are gaps there, how do we ensure that how do we ensure equity in the process? How do we make sure that we're not leaving students behind? We don't want to marginalize any of our children in this work. And if we do see gaps, what will be our plan? What will be our plan if we see a gap? Will the lead team be responsible for analyzing it and coming up with a counter plan? I think that might be a good idea, but no one is going to do it if we don't have that answer to that in advance. So that people, as they begin this implementation, they know they can look down the road and say, this is the plan right now. Now, we also have to think about the fact that you can build a plan in the beginning for implementation. You can answer all these questions. An item could surface that you don't have an answer for. So the issue there is, how are you going to deal with it? We're going to bring our lead team back together again. And what is your plan for keeping it going? How do we keep the process like this constantly renewing itself, doing the work of making sure that this becomes part of the culture of the system? John talked about this in the very beginning. When you're working on this kind of a project, when we're focusing on trauma and the idea of implementing this system-wide, what's the job going to be for keeping it going? This is the way we do business in our school. You want to create that kind of an attitude, that kind of a lead. So when we look at all that, what you end up seeing is this is your implementation kind of pre-strategy approach, pulling people together. There's a lot of information on the screen. When you look at it, you go, oh my goodness. But if you do this in the beginning, you're really set with the work that I shared in the beginning. The quality of leadership matters. Teachers will be motivated. The staff will understand. There'll be quality of work, right? They'll have a sense that we've got a plan. We've got a lot of issues that have been raised. We can make a difference. We can do the work. That's what this is all about. So that's kind of where I wanted to lead you before John and I open it up for questions from you. And I'm not sure if there's anything in the chat box right now, but I want to make you aware of a couple of quick things. One is that we've been doing virtual institutes, trauma-skilled institutes. We've been doing them on a regular basis. This is the one that's coming up in July 20th, 22nd, and 27th. Those only last, they're hour-and-a-half sessions. There's pre-work and post-work. This is an important part of the work that we do. And maybe, John, you want to mention anything about certification?
Sure. We have two in the area of the trauma skilled. We have two certifications, and one of those is a school can work doing implementation with National Dropout Prevention Center and work toward trauma skilled, being a trauma skilled school or certified school. We also have an individual certification where individuals can go through that process. They take some training, they do a lesson plan kind of project, and they work through both of those very closely with Nancy Nielsen, again, who's on this, this call. But that allows them to do some of this training and some of this work within their school. When we're working with a lead team and working with a school, the lead team members, if the school is going for certification, the lead team members are usually, as a part of that, lead team members are certified in the individual realm as well.
Great. Thanks, John. And one last plug for our private nonprofit is that now that COVID is kind of a little bit behind us, but we're staying on top of it. We just want to let you know that we are going to be holding an October event, an at-risk youth national forum. It's Designing the Road Ahead. And this will be an event that will engage with not just the research that we have at the Center for Dropout Prevention, but this will also include a strand that's focused on trauma-skilled schools.
Ray, just in response to the information, and I'd love for anybody to have questions, but in response to your information, and I mentioned that we have some implementations that don't do well, and that's primarily, we see that in leadership. And some of that there's really two approaches to that. One is the leader a lot of times will say, okay, this is what we need. And they hand it to a counselor or they hand it to the school social worker, and they just let them run with it. And the leaders get out of the way, and just the leaders need to be involved in this process because they need to own this issue and own this change. The other way that we would see that happen is some leaders say, okay, I know we need this, and I know the implementations we need to put in place and things. So they bypass the process.
Yeah.
And that takes away the biggest motivator, which is the collective efficacy that Ray spoke about. And the trauma-skilled schools model is not a curriculum. It's not something where you're checking off boxes, but you're building around a framework that is, if you think of a skeleton, and you're building the meat and the muscle and everything around it, and it looks different for every school. And that takes a process, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of some difficult decisions, but it is a process. So, okay, with that, I don't know if you have any questions.
And I know it's early in the morning for some people, and we want to be cautious and thoughtful about your time as well. We wanted to make this a thoughtful program that could give you some good ideas and good strategies for implementation as well as success in other implementations. I don't see anything out there, John. You have any wisdom you want to throw out, or Tommy or Nancy? You want to say anything about your certification process, or Thomas? Tommy, you want to say anything brilliant? You always come up with great ideas.
I actually think we have some people who are going through our certification process on this call.
Oh,
I recognize
cool.
some names. So it is a worthy process. And if you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat. So if you have any questions, you can follow up with those with me.
Ray, I'll just add that y'all mentioned that we have a lot of implementations going across many states across the country, and most of them are being successful, and we are seeing some amazing results throughout these implementations. So I would, I would really love to see anybody that's interested. Feel free to get in touch with me if you like. I'll be glad to give you any information as to how to maybe get started, and we'll develop a proposal for you or do whatever we need to help you with this process. But it is very valuable concept that we've come up with, or John's come up with. So, feel free.
And I would just add, what we're seeing that's very successful is, and it happens first in small districts, but we're in conversations with some large districts as well. But when a district wants to implement this, it's almost like you implement it as district-wide, and you come up with some policies, practices, some implementations that you're going to do district-wide. Everybody in the district is going to do those things. But then each school then underneath that district would do almost their own implementation, where they are coming up with initiatives and things that are specific for that school. And it works very well, provides a strong sense of unity and belonging. we are working with some larger districts, and what they are doing is they'll choose a segment of their schools as a pilot to go through.
Yep.
And so even if you're doing this as a district, it's a good exercise even for the district office and the district structure to look at this at the same time.
Yeah, we actually have a very large implementation in with AIU 8, is that it?
Right.
Yes.
And that's a that's a large implementation where they had lots of schools, but they created a central office team that kind of helped to lead a lot of the work. So there's lots of ways to look at this. I just want to say on behalf of National Dropout Prevention and the Successful Practices Network, really appreciate you all joining us today for this. Again, if you want to reach out, our emails are up on the screen. Look forward to anything, getting messages from you. I wish you all well in the balance of today. Good luck, and kind of hopefully it was of value to you. Gave you a little idea about how to implement and thinking about the key aspects of that. Thanks very much.